Reapportionment worked a small revolution in Connecticut politics. Before 1965, cities were barely represented in the Connecticut House of Representatives. The four major cities had only 8 representatives out of 294. After reapportionment, they had 38 out of 177. Along with the enfranchisement of cities went the enfranchisement of the black population concentrated in them. Prior to the revision of the state constitution in 1965, only one black representative had ever served in the Connecticut legislature. In 1967, 5 blacks won seats. By 1983, blacks, who form about 8% of Connecticut's population, held 8% of seats in the Senate and 4% of seats in the House. As a result of reapportionment, more than half of those elected to the Connecticut House in 1967 were new to the legislature. They were widely described as a new breed, as former legislator, now Judge Robert Satter, recalled.
The kind of person that came in as a consequence of reapportionment was not the old party hack who had been elected over and over again from a small town, regardless of what he did, because the legislature didn't do much anyway. Now you had a group of people that saw the opportunity for program, and these younger people were a revitalizing influence. It became a different kind of person, a different kind of job, much more responsibility and much more effort had to be put into it.
In the wake of reapportionment, the legislature enacted an agenda which had been bottled up in committee for decades. Robert Satter.
It was unbelievable what they did. There was a clean air bill. There was a bill to create a Department of Community Affairs. That was a bill designed to start directing programs at poverty, to help the anti-poverty agencies, fund them and assist them in their programs, and also assist the cities for the first time in programs that were important to the cities, primarily dealing with poverty and with those kinds of problems.
While the 1965 constitutional reform virtually enfranchised Connecticut cities for the first time, the biggest gainers in the long run were the suburbs. During the 1960s, 14 Connecticut towns grew by more than 100%, and 38 grew by more than 50%, reflecting what has been described as the great middle-class exodus from the cities to the suburbs. After the reapportionments of 1965 and 1972, it is estimated that half the seats in both House and Senate were suburban in character. The one-person, one-vote principle changed the kinds of legislation the Connecticut legislature was prepared to consider. In 1967, the General Assembly passed important bills that had long been stuck in committee. One was Truth in Lending. Another was the Community Development Act, which provided grants for cities, demolition of unsafe buildings, neighborhood facilities, housing projects, rehabilitation, and other urban programs. In 1969, the legislature passed a Racial Imbalance Act to require integration of Connecticut public schools. Connecticut's was the first legislature to create a committee on the environment, and during the 1970s, the legislature passed such environmental legislation as the Bottle Bill, the Environmental Policy Act, and the City and Town Development Act, protecting oceanfronts and wetlands. It is doubtful that any of these laws would have been passed before legislative reapportionment. But the improved system of representation also meant that the legislature better reflected the primary divisions of Connecticut society. Once the primary political division in Connecticut was between the Republican Party, representing small towns and major business interests, and the Democratic Party, representing urban interests. With reapportionment, the central line of conflict was drawn between poor cities and affluent suburbs. Urban-suburban conflict was clearly reflected in fights over the distribution of state educational funds. Conflict between income groups was reflected in the passage and subsequent repeal of a state income tax. The ultimate effect of fairer representation has been to make Connecticut politics more accurately reflect the conflicts of a state with America's second highest per capita income and 2 of its 10 poorest cities.